Welcome to Drinking on the Edge. I'm its host, David Fuhr, and joining me here at Radio Free Rhinecliff Studio is Matthew Mercier, who's new to the RFR retinue. Welcome, and thanks for producing this show, Matthew. With me and Matthew here in studio in Rhinecliff, we have Kevin Pike, who's previously been a guest with his Branchwater Farms. He operates in the nearby town of Milan with his partner, Robin Touche. And Kevin is here under different auspices today. Kevin, welcome to Drinking on the Edge.
Good morning. Thank you.
And tell us, please, what is the auspices under which, the umbrella in which you're joining us today?
My main job and what I've been working in for the last over 35 years is wine. So I'm a wine importer. I focus on Northern European wines, of which Switzerland is a country that I import wines from.
And that's a wonderful segue into today's topic, which is Swiss wines and many aspects of it. And our sole guest is none other than Dr. José Vouillamoz, who's tuning in from his hometown of Sion in the Valais of Switzerland. Welcome, José.
Hello, thank you for having me.
José wears many hats in the wine world. He is one of the world's foremost grapevine geneticists and has contributed to many useful tomes and conferences and academic sessions about this. He directs a very successful wine consumer club in Switzerland, and he is most notable for this episode of DOTE, the author of Swiss Grapes, History and Origin. José, Switzerland, it grows wine grapes, it makes wine. Clue us in.
Yes, let's make it clear. We are talking about Switzerland, not Sweden. Okay, just but so many times have I heard in the US that people confuse Switzerland with Sweden. Yes, Switzerland does make wine. Very little amount of it on the face of the planet, but we do make wine since a long time. We have a long history of winemaking in Switzerland, going back to the Roman era, and even before that, the Celts were making wine in Switzerland already. So we are a historical wine country.
That is quite a history. Since the Roman and Celtic times, was wine grapes consistently made? Is it part of the culture?
Yes, it has been part of the culture. We have archaeological artifacts showing that wine was consumed and produced in Switzerland already 800 years before Christ. And it has been so continuously until today. Switzerland has developed many indigenous grape varieties. That's why I wrote the book Swiss Grapes, focusing on the indigenous grape varieties from Switzerland. We have a total of 80 indigenous Swiss grape varieties, out of which 69 are man-made crossings. So hybrids or crossings, and 21 are historical, spontaneous, indigenous grape varieties, which are the ones that I'm more excited to speak about.
We'll do a little bit about that shortly. And these indigenous grapes, I believe that the maintenance of indigeneity of grapes is somewhat based upon the immersion of the culture in those grapes as well. I think adding to the Switzerland having these indigenous grapes is this relatively geographic isolation that it enjoys. These things maybe weren't shared so much. Again, we've done podcasts where we talked about the east coast of the Mediterranean and how the grapes first came from the Caucasus down there and spread from there because of historic reasons. But Italy, of course, has, to Switzerland south, has a wide number of indigenous grapes as well. But let's turn over to Kevin here, who makes a business of importing some of these wines with his Schatzi Wines import company here in the U.S. He's one of the most prolific importers, if not the most prolific importer of Swiss wines into this country. Kevin, what's your take on these indigenous grapes and perhaps the not so indigenous grapes of Switzerland today?
I think Switzerland is a very interesting country for people that love European wines, because it's the center, it's the meeting point of both the romantic, meaning from Rome, the Roman part of Europe, and the Germanic part of Europe. They're both combined there. It's also the headwaters of two very important rivers in the world of wine, the Rhine River and the Rhone River that ends in the Mediterranean, and then, of course, the Rhine that ends in the North Sea. And the wine regions that I like the most, Northern Rhone wines, also the Rhine River all the way through Germany, are areas that I have appreciated for wine importing for a long time. And so it seemed natural to come to Switzerland to figure out where this all started. It was compelling for that reason. Switzerland is, I think, around 15,000 hectares of vines thereabouts, so about the size of Alsace, but only 1% of the country's production is exported. For me, it was also an opportunity to kind of bring into the United States wines that were not so well known here. The wines are mostly consumed within the country, which means that they're expensive to export because the producers don't really need to export the wines. But more forward-leaning producers are saying to really be known on the world stage, you need to export, and therefore they can work with us on pricing to make them available here.
That's great. Then it falls to José to, because of his access to all the wines, to kind of illuminate us a little further. You'd mentioned about first of all, before we go into the wide varieties that you already mentioned, it's not a homogeneous country. It's a country of many microclimates and terroir situations. And in kind of a quick overview, what are the different regions and what sort of expectations should we have for what nature provides us there in Switzerland?
Yeah, as Kevin said, we only export 1% of the production, so people abroad are not aware of what's going on in Switzerland. We used to say that Swiss wine does not exist. That's a pun. That's a joke, because there's so many different climates, so many different grape varieties. Total, we cultivate more than 250 grape varieties on the 15,000 hectares in the country. That's huge. It's almost crazy, in my opinion. But we have such a diversity. If we look at the map of Switzerland, the largest region where I currently live, in Valais, this is the region where you find the ski resorts, famous ski resorts like Verbier, Zermatt, Crans-Montana, and so on. In this region, we have many indigenous grape varieties, and we are not far from Piemonte, in Italy. The second largest is Vaud. Capital city is Lausanne, where you find the Museum of Olympic Games. In Lausanne, you have also the Lavaux vineyard, which is a World Heritage. So we put this on the world map with that kind of recognition. It's not far from Savoie in France. It's on the other side of the Geneva Lake. There is Canton Geneva. Then we have Neuchâtel, which is not far from Jura and Burgundy in France. Then we have all the part that we call Western Switzerland, so the German-speaking part of Switzerland. Sorry, I think it's Eastern. I always confuse the Eastern Switzerland, sorry. These are the cities like Basel, Bern, Zurich, and all this area is one group of terroir. The most famous is Graubünden. They also call it Bündner Herrschaft. They make fantastic Pinot. And the last one is Ticino in the south, where they speak Italian, which is the best place for Merlot, and they are very close to the Italian border. So even within these specific 6 regions that have been defined, we can observe a variety of different soils, different traditions. So it's really a fascinating country, worth a visit if you want to experience the Swiss wines, because many of them are not available abroad. And if you come to visit, you will understand the fascinating diversity of Swiss wine.
What's interesting to me when I was with Gilles Besse, and I think we'll talk about him in a little bit, as a winemaker in the Valais, he took me to a restaurant, which I cannot remember the name of, but I'm sure you know it, where you can get raclette from different cows all over the Valais, and you get to taste, it's the same breed of cow, but it's a different grass type that they're eating, and they serve it to you, and it's one of the most instructional terroir events I think I've ever had in my life. We all talk about terroir in wine, but it happens also in cheese and other things, because the cow's milk tastes different depending on where along the Valais the cow is eating, and it's a really fascinating thing. And in Switzerland, they typically serve that, just come by the table, they slice it off, they scrape it off with just warm potatoes and a glass of chasselas, and it's perfect.
That's the first. I've never heard anything quite like that. And I thought the concept of merroir, which I had come across back in 2007 and explored it a little bit, I thought that was pushing things. You've taken me further, Kevin. Thank you.
So, Kevin, you're talking my heart, because this restaurant is 10 minutes from my home, and it's almost my second home. I always bring my guests there. It's fascinating to taste various different types of cheese with the so-called raclette. And indeed, even for cheese, we have different aromatic expressions according to the terroir. But sorry to put down a little bit of the romantic side of it. They like to tell that it's from the diverse flora that the cows are eating, which can be true depending on the season, but at the same time, at the same flora in the mountain is all over Valais is more or less the same. And my hypothesis is that the differences between the regions come from the flora of bacteria or cheese fermentation that are different from one side to the other. So it's a bit less romantic, but more scientific. And I have a tendency to believe in the diversity of floral bacteria for fermentation rather than the plants and the flowers that they are eating. It still is worth it. It's one of my favorite dishes. It's a bit heavy, so that's why I only eat raclette at the weekend.
That makes sense.
And hopefully with some relatively high acid white wines to help digest it. Yeah, indeed. Speaking of which,
the best combination is with Châtelat that we call fondant in Valais. We can talk about that later, which is not high acid.
It is not, but the segue is perfect because Kevin is now holding up a bottle of Gilles Besse's Les Terrasses Chasselas. And he's pouring.
That's a perfect combination, perfect match with raclette.
Pouring a taste for us at 8:17 in the morning here in New York. It's a good immediate post-breakfast wine, shall we say?
Yeah, but by the Swiss standard, it's already too late.
So you keeping up with your neighbors to the south. Good on you, with their café correttos.
So Chasselas, I think, is the most. There's more Pinot Noir grown in Switzerland, I believe, than Chasselas. But certainly Chasselas is the grape that people most identify with. It's grown in Neuchâtel, it's grown in Vaud, it's grown in Valais. This example is from the Valais. I didn't bring an example from the Vaud, but in the Vaud you have more limestone clay soils, and here it's more schist soils.
Châtelat is a delicate variety. I always remember Jancis Robinson visiting Switzerland with me and telling me that Châtelat is delicate but too delicate, and Châtelat is neutral but too neutral, like you Swiss guys. And I had to pour her very ancient vintages of Châtelat with 20 or 30 years of age for her to understand the extreme capacity of this variety to age with time. And old Châtelat are really fantastic. They develop unexpected aromas. And for me, Châtelat is the best variety to express the terroir. If you think of Muscat would never express any terroir, fine, because it's too powerful in aromas. But Châtelat being very delicate in aromas, the differences between terroir are very interesting. If you take the same producer in Vaud or Valais or Neuchâtel or whatever, making the wine the same from two different plots, even the most basic wine will smell and see the differences, which is fascinating.
I happen to agree. My one long-time trip into Switzerland and understanding the wines led me to the conclusion that Chasselas can age incredibly well for decades in the right conditions, in the right hands. And in that, I was convinced in that visit where I made a point of tasting the same wine over successive or older vintages with the very generous and kind winemakers there. And since then, in the rare occasions that Swiss wines come to the United States with multiple vintages, I make a beeline to those tables, or I'll sit for the presentation just to have this amazing experience of tasting well-preserved Chasselas wines from Switzerland. And worth mentioning is that Chasselas has a different name across the border in Germany. It's known as Gutedel, most likely. And you can find bits of it in Alsace, too, sometimes of extremely high quality as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Chasselas is cultivated for wine in those regions. But very surprisingly, the country that is cultivating the biggest surface of Chasselas is Romania.
No, I didn't know that. Fascinating.
Simply because it's used over there as a table grape. Almost no one makes wine with Chasselas over there. It's only used as a table grape. So it has more Chasselas than Switzerland. But don't tell anyone.
Is the Valais the region that produces the widest variety of grapes in Switzerland?
In my book that you kindly showed, Swiss Grapes, I have 21 indigenous grape varieties, and 14 of them come from Valais. The Valais is in the mountain, and it has been isolated for a long time. Before the communication roads, before the railway got there in 1860, it was a very much isolated part of the country, very poor, and people have developed different agricultural aspects. You were speaking about raclette cheese. Cheese was made to have proteins during the winter. We have dried meat, we have dry bread, and the steak, oat bread. It has been developed not only for gastronomical purposes, but mostly to survive in the harsh winter conditions. So these populations have developed many different things, including grape varieties that have not traveled anywhere else on the planet.
Could we talk maybe about some of those other grape varieties that are in the Valais that we bring in, for example, Cumana Rouge, Cornellan, Titarvine, etc.?
Of course. I think one of the most famous is Petit Arvin, which I call simply Arvin. It's a very old variety, rather aromatic, of which you can make dry wines, semi-dry or late harvest sweet wines. And by the way, Arvin, late harvest by Marie-Thérèse Chapaz, one of the most famous Swiss winemaker, got 100 points in the Wine Advocate of Robert Parker last year, which was the first Wine Advocate in Switzerland ever.
Do you recall
who
was the reviewer for that? Do you recall the name?
Stefan Reinhardt.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. He's quite knowledgeable about Swiss wines. He knows Switzerland since decades, and he's really an expert on Swiss wines and grapes. Petit Arvin is aromatic, it's high in acidity. It does not age necessarily well, despite its high acidity. I would not keep Petit Arvin more than 10 years, I would say. Whereas I would not hesitate with Châtelat to keep it more than 20 or 30 years, even if it's not acidic. So this is a kind of a mystery for the winemakers, because we always think that acidity is a prerequisite for aging. It's not the case with wines with Châtelat aging and Petit Arvin not aging very well. But still, Petit Arvin is the easiest way to introduce people to white Swiss wines. When it comes to red, as you said, Pinot Noir is the most planted variety in the country, in different regions, including in Valais. But we also have indigenous reds that are very interesting. The most exciting for us and for the consumers is called Cornellan, and the other one is Humanier Rouge. I think you brought both, Kevin, right?
I brought the Cornellan and I brought the Pinot Noir from Graubünden.
So you have the Cornellan from Zauvigny. Cornellan is a very old variety from Valais, and I have worked on its parentage when I was doing my genetic postdoc at UC Davis in California, which was really interesting because I was in California at the lab of Carol Meredith, very famous for grape genetics, and I was working on Swiss grapes, and nobody knew the name of those grapes, and I could not share my discoveries with anyone. Cornellan, Germanier. What vintage is it?
2020.
A very good one. Very ripe, very round for red grapes in Valais. So by the DNA of Cornellan, I've been able to find the identity of its natural parents. So just to make it clear, all the grape varieties are like human beings. They all have one father, one mother. The most recent ones have been created by the hand of humans. If we take Alicante Boucher, Müller-Thurgau, they have been created at research stations. And in research stations, we create continuously new varieties, but the old ones have been created spontaneously without intervention of the human hand within the vineyard. So Cornellan is a natural cross between two grapes from Aosta Valley. Aosta Valley is just across the border. It's in Italy, just across the border from Valais, which makes sense. And its two parents are called Petit Rouge, small red, and Maiolet. Petit Rouge is the most widespread in that part of Italy, and Maiolet is almost unknown to the consumers. So it was really interesting to see that Cornellan, that has become the flagship of indigenous grape varieties of Valais and also of Switzerland, comes from the neighboring region called Aosta Valley, now part of Italy. But if we look back 200 years, more than 200 years ago, we all belong to the realm of Savoie. So we were belonging to the same political area, and we had many exchanges between the two valleys. And if you drive from Switzerland to northern Italy, you will cross the Saint Bernard Pass, which is the link between the two valleys, and people have exchanged plants, they have exchanged breeds of cows, they have exchanged languages, the dialects are the same, so the connection is there. And with genetics, I was able to find another evidence for this connection.
Can you talk more about that exchange in Val d'Aosta, especially as it relates to Humana Rouge? Because I think Gilles told me at one point that Humana Rouge in Val d'Aosta was actually called Cornelen, and then it came up to Switzerland. The name was then changed, and so this causes confusion between Cornelen and Humana Rouge?
In Valais, the name Cornelen is the name currently used by Swiss producers, by Valais producers for this wine. Before 1972, this grape was called Rouge du Pays, which means red of the land, something like that, which was not good for marketing. And in 1972, the chief of the Swiss viticulture read a book about Aosta Valley wines and grapes. And he saw the name Cornelen, and he thought, wow, that's a nice name, I like it. So we're going to borrow the name, or let's say we're going to steal the name to this Aosta Valley variety and give it to the Rouge du Pays. Just a parenthesis, Tempranillo in Ribera del Duero is called Tinta del País, which means exactly Rouge du Pays, red of the land. Anyway, they changed the name, so they stole the name 50 years ago, and since then it has become a famous variety in the country. At the same time, in Aosta Valley, where the real Cornelen exists, they did not develop it. It was almost dying. Today, a few hectares are still surviving. But this original Cornelen from Aosta Valley still exists, and it has been introduced in the Valais, Switzerland, where they gave it the name.
It's complicated, but it's also very precise. It's very Swiss.
There you go. What's not complicated is the Chasselas. What's from Gilles Bess of Germanier Winery, also a relative neighbor of yours, José. What's the vintage on this bottle we're tasting here?
22.
2022. It's a light-bodied wine, dry, absolutely dry, with it reminds me a little bit, smell and tasting of white peaches. You know?
Yeah, it's very floral. But I think the Chasselas, from especially in the Vaud, is a totally different expression because of the limestone soils and the clay. It's more Burgundian in style, or a little more Jura in style. And that makes sense. The Jura Mountains are right along that side.
The Vaud expression is more influenced by the terroir, and it usually have this flintstone aroma. And in Valais, the sunshine is more important. We have more sunshine than Vaud, so the aromas are stronger and it's more floral. It has typically the linden tree, the leaves of the linden tree aromas that are typical of Chasselas. And as you can see, I like to make a bird. This bottle is by a screw cap, which for me is the best closure system for not only for Chasselas but for all the wines in the world. Because I've tasted all Chasselas. Recently, I've had 1980, the same wine, one with screw cap, one with cork. The same producer, I was at his winery. The one with cork was more than dead. It was undrinkable. The one with screw cap was still enjoyable, fresh, complex. I'm happy that Swiss producers, at least for Chasselas and many white wines, have turned to screw caps.
I've been a big proponent of screw-capped wine since I was privileged to, in my early days of settling in London, to taste a vertical tasting with Geoffrey Grosset of his Rieslings from South Australia, dating back to the beginning, many of which were cork versus screw-capped side by side. My only problem with screw-caps is the environmental impact of the production of aluminum associated with them versus the environmentally positive effect of, generally speaking, of cork forests. So it's a topic for another episode. So we're on to the Cornelen that we've been talking so readily about. So this is a really deep, intensely hued red wine we got here. Let's talk about the smells and tastes usually associated with Cornelen, this one in particular.
It's very dark in color because the skin of the grape is very thick. And as you may know, the color of the wine is in the skin of the berries, almost never in the juice. Most of the wine grapes have colorless juice, and the color is in the skin. Cornelen has a lot of anthocyanins, which are the pigments, the red pigments or red-blue pigments of wine, and this one is very dark. I'm not tasting with you, but I know the wine very well. The typical characteristic of Cornelen is black cherries. Cornelen for me is black cherries on the nose, and in the mouth, we still speak about cherries in the taste, and also it has a very pleasant bitterness. And this bitterness reminds me when you eat cherries and you're too lazy to go and spit the stone, and you keep the cherry stone in your mouth for a while before spitting it. So this is Cornalan for me.
Nicely said.
I don't know if you agree, Kevin.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's. I didn't start importing this wine from Gilles until a couple years of our relationship, just because I wanted to keep the portfolio pretty focused. But because he produces Armenia and Arvine and Cornalan and Syrah and Humana Rouge and Savagnin and Chasselas, now I import all 7 of those varieties. But it was I thought Syrah would be a little bit more easier to sell, and it was a great story because this is where the Rhone River begins. But now we're more partial, I think, to the Cornalan just in the way, stylistically.
It's a unique grape. I'd add it's a medium-bodied style. The tannins are there, but they're not at all imposing. And there's a certain, José said, a slightly bitter but warming, spicy finish to it. It's not overwhelming. It's not powerful, but it's there, and it keeps you attentive to the wine itself. It's a really well-hewn wine. Thank you, Gilles. And one thing worth mentioning on this bottle you can get from Schatzi Wines with Kevin is the flanged lip. It's not a screw cap. It's a cork-finished wine. But here we have a widely flanged lip, which makes for really great pouring without any spillage that straight lip bottles will often allow you to do.
I didn't know that. I thought it was just...
Well, actually, Gilbert used this bottle because when it's empty, you can use it as a sex toy.
Kevin, what is the general suggested retail price for these first 2 wines that we tasted?
The Chasselas, the first one we did, the Terrace Fondant, is around the $25 range retail. The Cornalan is a lot more expensive. It's probably in the $38 to $42 retail.
Still within the bounds of reason in terms of fine wines, and these 2 are certainly fine.
Can I say something about the prices? We always hear people complaining that Swiss wines are too expensive. This is not true. This is not true. We used to say that cheap Swiss wines are too expensive. But top-notch, high-end Swiss wines are not expensive enough. For the same quality, we are 5 times less expensive than Bordeaux or Burgundy. And if you look at the amount of work that is needed to make wine out of these steep slopes that we have, like the one behind me, in Valais or in Vaud or in Ticino. In Bordeaux, where everything is flat, you can mechanize all the vineyards and you can use machines in all the vineyards. So the total number of hours that you use per hectare per year is around 300. In Valais, it's between 1,000 and 2,000 hours per hectare per year. So we should be 3 times to 5 times more expensive than Bordeaux, and we're not.
And for those of you who made the trip to the west coast of the U.S., you can see versions of this, of course, but you're not likely to see it like you are in Switzerland. However, you see farming on massive scales of grapevines on the west coast by comparison to Switzerland, which is overwhelmingly a country of micro growers and producers. You don't have much of anything in that scale. There are grapevines grown on flat areas in Switzerland, to be sure. It's not all terrace steep slopes. But even those flatland ones are not mechanized or as expansive nearly as what you're going to find on the U.S. left coast or different parts of the U.S., even here in New York State, in certain areas where you can find large wine grape growing. So if you're looking for true growing and micro-vinification, make your way over to Switzerland for these wines. And just as a point of reference, these bottles that we're drinking here, generally speaking, translating from Swiss francs into U.S. dollars, what's the relative price you'd be paying for a bottle out of a shop for these wines in Sion?
For this one in particular, I think it would be around 20, so not much less than what you pay in a Schatzi wine.
Okay, so basically, yeah, that makes sense. So what Kevin has to endure with having the wines exported over here and the added costs through the U.S. Distribution system, it's quite a reasonable...
It's a 3-tier system.
It's quite a reasonable price that the consumer is going to pay in the shop here in the United States for the Germanier Cornalan. I agree.
I have a question, if it's okay to move on to another region, but can we talk about Ticino in a little bit? It's a region that I've not been to. I've been to the others, but I've never been to the Italian side. Why is it that Merlot is the most predominant grape there? How did it get there? Are there any other indigenous varieties in Switzerland that has grown in Ticino besides Merlot?
First of all, Merlot is not indigenous to Ticino, of course. Merlot comes from Bordeaux area. It's a matter of rain. The amount of rain in Ticino, just for comparison, very simple. In Valais, where comes the cornerland, we have around 500 millimeters per square meter per year. 500. In Vaud, around 1,000. In Ticino, 2,000. Ticino is more similar to the Atlantic coast of Bordeaux than any other region of Switzerland. That's why they have been successful in cultivating Merlot. Merlot we know exactly when it was introduced. It's a consequence of phylloxera. Phylloxera is this small insect that came from the US to Europe in the late 19th century.
You're welcome.
So phylloxera was destroying most of the vineyards in Europe, and the key to fight against phylloxera was to graft the European varieties onto American rootstocks that were resistant to phylloxera. So when people had to replace their vineyards, most of the people in most regions in Europe, they have changed the grape variety. And in particular in Ticino, they had a diversity of grape varieties, and the most widespread back then was Bondola. Bondola is one of the indigenous reds of Ticino. Many others have completely disappeared. They are extinct. There's still a few amounts of Bondola. But in 1906, when phylloxera was hitting Ticino, they chose to replace almost everything with Merlot. So the introduction of Merlot in Ticino is 1906. And it has been a huge distribution of Merlot everywhere. And today, Bondola has almost disappeared. But Merlot was a good idea for the reasons I mentioned, for the climate. And in a few decades, at blind tastings, it happened that several Ticino Merlot were voted higher than Bordeaux Merlot at blind tastings with professionals. There's one famous tasting in which Merlot was rated higher than Chateau Petrus, for example. This is why Merlot has become the king variety of Ticino.
I've had very good examples of Merlot from Ticino. There's also a lot of rosé of Merlot made there, which in the United States is commercially extremely difficult, especially at those prices. It's a region that I'm still fascinated by just because I don't represent anyone in Ticino, but I'm still very curious about it. And do we know the parentage? Do we know the parentage of Bandola?
We don't know its parentage, but we know that it crossed with another super rare variety called Completa to give birth to Bondoletta, another Ticino super rare variety. So these two were around Ticino, German-speaking part of Switzerland, and they crossed each other to produce children, but we don't know the parents of Bondola.
Okay.
And in many cases, as I said, every single grape variety has one father, one mother, but when they are very old, it means that the parents are older, and in many cases, they have completely disappeared, and we will never find. For example, we don't know the parents of Petit Arbin. They have probably disappeared. Same for Armine, same for Châtelat. We don't know the parents of Châtelat. They have probably disappeared.
Lost in the subsoils of time. Just a side note here, I'm curious, the high rainfall of Ticino, would that be a cause of its proximity to the Adriatic and the winds coming up sometimes from the Adriatic and the rain from there? Is it from a different meteorological influence?
No, it's the proximity with two big lakes, Lake Como, where your George Clooney is living, and Lake Maggiore. So these two lakes bring humidity, and Ticino is at the foot of the Alps. So the clouds need to release all the rain before going above the mountains, so everything drops on Ticino.
And speaking of the climatic issues endemic to Switzerland, your native Valais is, as I recall, the sunniest, warmest part of, and making it... I when I was there, I would see people having potted figs and palms that they would wheel out after the deep dead of winter into their gardens and their sidewalks and all that. So it's warm enough that people in the spring can grow figs and palms outside.
Yes, it's very warm in the summer, very cold in the winter. Warm during the day, cold during the night. So that's the perfect condition for grape growing. We used and many other fruits. We have apricots, we have apples and pears and different types of fruits. We usually call Valais the California of Switzerland.
Okay. let's move on to Graubünden then, and Pinot Noir country on the German side. I brought with me from Selvinen. This is old Swiss Pinot Noir clones and old Dijon clones, almost in equal proportions. So this is the Selvinen. I don't know if you can see the label.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Yeah, Georg Fromm is one of the most successful grower of Pinot. He also had a long experience in New Zealand, where he was making excellent Pinot Noir down there. In Graubünden, the Pinot Noir, I think, is doing one of the best wines. Best Pinot Noirs in the country comes from Graubünden. The climate is more appropriate for Pinot than Valais, for example. We grow Pinot in Valais. There are some very good ones, but it's too hot and too sunny. And Pinot in Valais, in my opinion, is better on the left bank of the Rhone River because there's less sunshine. On the right bank, sometimes it's too hot and the grapes are almost cooked and the wines are too strong for me. So Graubünden has an appropriate climate for Pinot. It's a bit similar to the climate in Burgundy, which is the realm of Pinot Noir. And Pinot Noir has been around since centuries in Graubünden. I would mention a news that I read yesterday. One of the most famous producers in Switzerland is wine. Maybe you've heard of it.
I would say it's been in the U.S. market. Of all the Swiss wineries, it's the one that's been here the longest.
Yeah. And small production, high quality, very expensive. I think it's $130 or $140 at the winery. In the shop, it will be around $300. And I just read yesterday that Bernard Arnault, owner of LVMH, owner of Château Cheval Blanc, is willing to purchase Ganten wine in Switzerland.
Wow.
And
That'll make the news to be sure and help.
Surprising news. On one side, the Ganten wine, so they are a couple, they don't have children, and they have been making wine for 42 years, so they want to sell it. On one side, it's a bit a shame that it's not in Swiss hands, but on the other side, if LVMH is interested in Swiss wine, it's also a good sign, a positive sign for Swiss wine in the world. It means that the quality is recognized because they are owning Château Cheval Blanc, they are owning Château d'Yquem and many different name, White de Chandon, Champagne, etc., etc.
Sure. So this Pinot Noir from Weingut Fromm, the Selvinen we're tasting now, is of 2017 vintage. I think it's showing remarkably well, Kevin. Thank you for bringing it.
This one came out of the cellar. This is current release that's in stock right now is 2022, but I brought something a little bit older just to show the age.
Cheers to that.
And this is the first vintage I imported from him.
The Pinot Noir from Graubünden can age easily 15 or 20 years, easily. And they are the most Burgundian in style in Switzerland. Also, some Pinot Noir from Neuchâtel area can be very Burgundian in style, and there are great achievements in Neuchâtel. In other regions of German-speaking Switzerland as well, if we think of Zurich, of Thurgau, of Aargau, they make fantastic northern-style Pinot Noir.
I would argue this puts me in the mind of a very fine Volnay. It's got that delicacy and that minerality that I associate with really good Volnays. To make a comparison for someone who wants that, something to hang their hat on, Burgundian like that, rather than something a bit more rich and powerful. This is a more delicate, more ethereal style. But the tannins are beautifully fine.
Yeah, I think the style of, and correct me if you think this is an incorrect assumption, but I think Neuchâtel Pinot Noir is a little bit more primary and a little bit more buried in its flavor and less structure. And here it has a little bit more structure and a little bit finer tannins, a little bit more restrained in its style.
Absolutely, you're right. And the Graubünden Pinot Noir, I think, are the ones that age the best. The German-speaking part of Switzerland makes the most age-worthy Pinot Noir. I just had a few weeks ago with a group of professional friends, professional tasters. I served them blind a 1997 Pinot Noir from Zurich area. And many of them were convinced that it was a fantastic José Chambertin.
Wow.
And it was Zurich.
Well, thank you for mentioning 1997, because my first experience in selling Swiss wines, limited as it is, and was in 2001 when I was sommeliering in California. My chef was a little-known young fellow named Scott Giambastiani. He's gone on to bigger, better things, working as the executive chef for a small company called Alphabet. But this young fellow I was working under as a chef, I was sommeliering there. I had on my wine list of 432 wines a 1997 Syrah from Bon Père Germanier, Jean-Paul Germanier, Gilles Besse's Syrah. And I thought, wow, okay,
Great.
I inherited this list. I didn't build it up from the beginning, but I inherited some interesting stuff, and a curious son that I was, I popped a bottle just for myself, and I thought, man, this is damn good, and the price was reasonable, especially compared to a lot of the multitude of California Syrahs I inherited. And so I took it upon myself, because no customers were ordering it on their own volition. Who's going to hell? Swiss wines? I'm here in the middle of California. Why should I order a Swiss wine? I'm going to have a California wine. I liked it so much, and the price was right. When I found a willing table, I would suggest, when they're oriented themselves towards Syrah, I'd say, you know what? I'm going to pour you something, and if you don't like it, that's okay. I'll taste it. I'll drink it with my colleagues at the end of the night. No problem. If you don't like it, I'll take it back. Here's the price. I'm not going to tell you where it's from. I'll bring it out to you. You'll taste it. Not once of the half a dozen times I can remember taking this position did anybody send back that bottle of Syrah from Switzerland. They took it and they loved it, and sometimes they ordered a second bottle. And so that told me that Swiss wines, when, of course, I told them it was a wine from Switzerland, which of course added to their enthusiasm and excitement at the table. They're tasting something new to them. So that for me was a revelatory experience, and I've always been thankful for Gilles for making that possible, and for Swiss Wines for having that capacity. That Syrah, even though it's associated with Rhone River in France, actually the Rhone River starts in Switzerland, so why not have Syrah from its beginnings?
Oh, that's great to hear. Can I share a story about Syrah? Syrah is not indigenous to Switzerland, of course. It comes from the northern Rhone in France. But it has been introduced in Valais, Switzerland in 1921. And next year we are preparing to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the first harvest of Syrah in Switzerland. So we're going to organize some events around that. But there is a story that I like. In 2007, there was a group of European tasters called the Grand European Great Jury of Wine, grouping 15 of the best tasters of Europe. And they compared all the Syrah vintage 2001 from all the world. And there were Syrah from Rhone Valley, the Gigal, Côte-Rôtie, Moulin, London, all the big names, Penfolds, Grange, Hermitage, everything was there, including Swiss wine. Everything served blind. And when they proclaimed the results, the 4 first positions were held by Swiss wine, by Swiss Syrah. And it was really funny because the number 1, it was Simon May Vieilleville, which is, even for me in Valais, it's very hard to find it. But anyway, the price is around $40, and it was voted better than many wines that are selling for $400. So that's why I keep saying that the best Swiss wines are not expensive enough. That's why. And also, you import the wines of Germanier, so made by Gilles Besse. They make a fantastic Syrah reserve called Caillasse.
Yes, it was the Caillasse Syrah that I poured in 2001. Yes.
Oh, really? The first vintage was 1995, if I'm not mistaken. So it was at the beginning of one of the best Syrah in Switzerland. And still, come on, the price for this quality, still affordable. In Switzerland, I'm selling it in my wine club. It's around $45 or $50.
Kevin, are you importing that particular one?
We do, of
Great.
course. Yeah, it's the flagship wine from the estate. We bring it in and it sells. And I think the retail price here is around $80. We have a lot of customer demand for it.
It's terrific. It's a terrific wine. Listen, gents, we got to wind this up. It's been a fantastic look into Swiss wines. Thank you both for coming, joining us here at Drinking on the Edge. If you are looking for a range of lovely Swiss wines, you import from, I think, 4 different producers, Kevin?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, from different parts of Switzerland, a couple we've tasted here today. You can look for these wines at SchatziWines.com, at SCHATZIWINES.com. And to find out more about Dr. José Vouillamoz and his many exploits and his insights, you can find him at josevouillamoz.com. That's JOSEVOUILLAMOZ.com. Gentlemen, look, Kevin, thank you for being my co-host, launching my co-hosting things here, eh?
Thank you for including me. I enjoyed it very much. It's always fascinating for me to talk to Jose because his knowledge about grapes and origins is unparalleled.
And on that note, I encourage people to look on wherever it is you find your books for his name associated as authoring or co-authoring books, including this one, Swiss.
I mean,
Excuse me. Oh, you have the French version.
I have the French version.
Kevin has a Cépage Suisse version. I have the Swiss wines version. But both of those should be available to you. If not, go to José's website to find more about the book. José, any last parting words for us?
thank you very much for having me. It's always exciting for me to speak about and promote Swiss wine. Happy to speak about this grape.
Thank you.
You can find it on Amazon in the US easily. I hope that Kevin will be successful in selling more Swiss wine in the US. Don't hesitate, Kevin, if you need any tip for Swiss wines, I'll be happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for the great job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to Drinking on the Edge, José. We'll speak soon.